In the film The Night of the Hunter, director Charles Laughton and cinematographer Stanley Cortez utilized familiar image and lighting to stabilize the narrative, create deeper connections throughout the film, and establish character development. Looking at movies describes familiar image as the repetition of compositions, graphic elements, sound, or sequence to affect the audience's interpretation of a moment by allowing them to experience and understand in the context of a similar shot from earlier in the film. Director Charles Laughton took a risk with this film, and many still do not know how to categorize it. The Night of the Hunter was the only film Laughton ever directed and was deemed an expressionistic oddity, which its failure overshadowed the rest of his career. Although people never know how to categorize the film, many never forget it. Roger Ebert says that Charles Laughton showed here that he had an original eye and a taste for material that stretched the conventions of the movies. Laughton made this film with such confidence in its uniqueness through shots, lighting, and familiar image. Many do not know what to do with it, but this movie is a great example of the impact cinematography, familiar image, and lighting has on a story and development of a film. An element of cinematography that leaves a great impact on this film is familiar image. In the beginning of the film, John's father is arrested right before his eyes. The camera shot shows the police arriving at their house, arresting John's father and bringing him to the ground with handcuffs. John watches the whole scene occur, and his face shows his fear and anxiety. The camera switches between John's father and John quickly to show the anxiety feeling during this scene. At the end of the film, the same shot occurs with Harry Powell, the evil preacher. While this emotion stumps many viewers at the end, John's repetition of his actions has a deeper meaning. When Powell is arrested, the exact order of events occurs again. The police show up, arrest Powell, and bring him to the ground and handcuff him. This triggers John's memory and emotions. The familiar image of this scene has an impact on John. Even though John hates Powell, the sight of his arrest brings back his anxiety, fear, and innocence from when he saw his father get arrested. Laughton and Cortez utilized familiar image to show John's emotions and the development of his character. Although John is one of the strongest characters throughout this film, holding this secret and watching after his sister Pearl, this event brings him back to one of his most vulnerable states. While familiar image contributes to the narrative, character development, and emotion throughout this film, so does the use of lighting. This film is shot in black and white, but through shadows and camera angles, the lighting can change, creating a deeper meaning behind a scene. Looking at movies states that black and white movies' distinct contrast and hard edges can look stark, somber, elegant, abstract, or simply different than our regular way of seeing things. Laughton and Cortez use shadows to show the villain, Harry Powell, in this most intense states. A black and white film like this in the 1950s was considered ahead of its time. The Telegraph discussed how Powell's unsettling character increases the uneasy feeling wherever the children glimpse their pursuer, usually not full on, but in the shadow or silhouette. His swaggering stance and the outline of his broad-brimmed hat are horribly and immediately recognizable. There are a few main scenes that show shadows and silhouettes to alter the mood and shift the movie to a horror aspect. When Powell finds John and Pearl at their new home after running away, he is found sitting outside in the dark, portrayed through a silhouette. Powell is shown like he would be in a childhood story, dark, and in order to show the children he is evil. The silhouette of Powell outside at night and the camera angle from the window also gives the viewer a sense of darkness and horror of what's to come. Another scene that uses light to portray the darkness and horror through Powell is when John and Pearl escape down the river. John sees the evil preacher approaching in the distance and uses Powell's silhouette on the horse to clue us in on Powell's purpose in the film, to elicit fear. Both of these scenes do not only use silhouettes and shadows to portray the evil and fear in this movie, but are used as a cinematography element of familiar image. Cinematographer Stanley Cortez has also worked with Orson Welles, the director of Citizen Kane. The Night of the Hunter is similar to Citizen Kane through the use of camera angles and lighting. Both films use camera angles and lighting, with shadows and silhouettes, to portray the power of the villains throughout the film. The Night of the Hunter is able to incorporate lighting and familiar image into the film in many ways some are afraid to attempt. The odd and expressionistic work of Laughton and Cortez opens up the viewer to a deeper meaning behind the story through the impact of light and familiar image in regard to fear and evil.